and employment. In Scotland, they were known as Workhouses. The information that goes back to the Statute of Cambridge in 1388, following the Black Death, which was the laws were designed to restrict the movements of labourers and making the state responsible for the poor. Poor laws in 1834 set up an established system of a kind to provide employment for the able-bodied. Things they were asked to do were breaking stones, crushing bones for fertilizer, picking oakum. Do you all know what picking oakum is?
No.
What they do in prisons, isn't it?
Is it to do with rope and twine or something?
Yeah, it's breaking down ships' ropes and using them for, wooding and stuff like that. But it's kind of a tedious, boring job. And they just have a big sharp hook that would split the oily ropes and break them down into smaller quantities. Mind-blowingly boring, I should think, but there you go. And there was sometimes involvement in local industries or whatever they were farmed out. Later on in the 19th century, provision was provided for the elderly, the infirm and the sick, as well as the unemployed and or homeless. Workhouses generally lasted until 1929 officially, when then turned into municipal infirmaries, but effectively leading up to the Second World War, they were virtually the same kind of thing. They were gradually replaced by the Public Assistance Board, which leading up to the National Assistance Act of 1948. In 1776, there were 1,800 workhouses nationally with a population of 90,000. But of course, in the 19th century, population explosion, in 1834, the new Poor Law saw the building of further 500 much larger workhouses, 2/3 of them being completed by, I've got 1940 there, it should be 1840, sorry. Going by today's delays on whatever else. 4 specific groups of people were targeted: the aged and the impotent.
That seems a bit harsh.
That's how it was worded, so I don't quite know how they...
Oh, it's off again.
Don't know how they decided people were impotent, but there you go.
I think that means
something
about
else.
physical disability, Graham. It won't
Yeah.
be about.
Okay, yeah.
It won't be about sexual impotence.
Okay. Children, orphans or the offspring of the inmates who were unable to care for them. Able-bodied males and able-bodied females. And they were quite often farmed out to local businesses and tradesmen. One suspects that they varied in quality quite a bit. Some would be better than others, of course. Some would be corrupt, and there'd be a certain amount of graft involved in providing food and all the rest of it for them. In Bristol, prostitutes were forced to wear a yellow garment and unmarried pregnant women a red one. Presumably, a similar dress codes operated in different parts of the country. So, it was kind of, I don't know, targeting people. Workhouses in Manchester particularly were in Blakely, Crumpsall and Withington. Prestwich Mental Hospital, or Asylum as it was called in those days, housed 3,000 patients suffering from alcoholism, delirium, poverty, mere old age or unsupported married mothers. So before 1834, the providing for the poor, was fairly higgledy-piggledy and oppressive, and kind of like forcing people to situations that they didn't want to be in. This is a map of the places in the northwest which had workhouses, local workhouses. So each of these little areas had their own. Manchester had probably more than 1 or 2. Manchester and Salford had more than 1 or 2. There's a picture of Manchester in the mid-19th century. There we have Manchester, nice, healthy place to live.
Awful.
Awful, isn't it, really? But there you go. I don't make it kind of like, well, we probably all remember when we were young that all the buildings in the city were covered in soot, basically. Everything was black.
Mm.
Yes, terrible.
Before the Clean Air Act. So, I practice to, what is it?
Dishonourable.
To the nation and Christian religion. So it's all tied up with God and being good and all the rest of it. And there you go. What's good for you. And the new poor laws caused a certain amount of consternation because they were fairly stringent, and the treatment often was, well, Christian but not very kind, put it like that. Punishments were fierce and conditions were fairly grim. But it's basically a lampoon of the new laws comparing the situation of the rich and the poor. This was the workhouse timetable, basically. So you got up between 5 and 6, you had breakfast between 6:30 and 7, you worked for 5 hours, had dinner, worked for another 5 hours, had supper, and then you went to bed at 8 o'clock. Sunday was a day of rest, presumably required to go to chapel in the morning. Or so. Food was dreary but nutritionally adequate. Breakfast was gruel and bread. Dinner was boiled pork or bacon with potatoes and veg, suet or rice pudding. Supper was bread, cheese and soup. Dining areas were roughly segregated, so men would be in one place, women would be in another. No exceptions were made on religious grounds, so if your religion forbade you from eating pork or whatever else, Jewish people particularly, that was your hard luck. There's no kind of concession to any of that kind of thing. Discipline was quite fierce. Dietary restrictions, you would cut off your food if you minor offences, swearing, feigning sickness. More serious, more dangerous kind of punishments for more serious offences. And the prayers before breakfast and after supper, and they were usually Church of England or non-conformists. But there you go. Some people recognise this. This is the Withington workhouse built in the 1850s. These buildings are still there. This rather elegant lodge house and the chapel behind with the dormitories, etc. for the poor people. It's now a rather swanky development of flats and all the rest, but these buildings still exist. So you've got this kind of facade of, quite small, but behind life was pretty grisly, I think. In fact, if you look at this garden in front of it, this is where Doreen will be staying at the moment, not in the garden, but in whatever's there now. So, but I always found the hospital itself rather forbidding.
I worked there for a while at Withington.
The wards,
the old hospital, yeah.
Yeah, I remember my uncle being there when I was a kid, and I found the wards rather, I don't know, distressing anyway. But there you go. But there you go. This is kind of how it looked from the air. So you've got these dormitories, etc. at the back, chapel, and these exercise areas. This is kind of sketchy plan of a typical workhouse, women's yard, men's yard. There's no concession to married couples. I think they were mainly kept apart, which seemed an extra cruelty to me, but there you go.
If they were kept apart, how come there were children born in the workhouses?
Well,
Where there's a will, there's a way.
yeah, there's no bike sheds, but you know what I mean. It was sort of Yeah, you're right. But on the other hand, some of them would have brought children with them anyway. You know, the children might already exist, but they were unable to support them, so they would be brought in as a family, and the men would be sent to, you know, one dormitory, the women to another. I say, I notice here there's a section for vagrants, so perhaps there was some kind of provision for people passing through. I don't know, but they obviously kept separate. But there you go. And here's a picture of orphans in a workhouse, which to me is very reminiscent of concentration camps and that kind.
Sad photo.
They're all boys, I think, here. Well, presumably this is because they were kept, even the children were kept separate, presumably. And am I right in thinking this young man here on the very far left with the cheeky face, he's on a stick? Is that?
Looks like he's only got one leg.
Yeah, he looks like he's yeah. But
Oh, bless.
kind of poignant picture, isn't it, really?
It is. It's
Yeah, I
awful.
think he's smiling for the camera, this one, but the rest don't look too
It's solemn.
yeah, it's sad. There you go. Crumpsall had a massive workout, which eventually was turned into North Manchester General Hospital. Some of it still exists, some of the old buildings.
Can tell it is.
And these buildings were, I think, some sort of asylum or something on Crescent Road, which were there until quite recently. It's not that long since these buildings have been pulled down. But,
Wouldn't that become Springfield Mental Hospital?
that's what I was thinking. I couldn't think of the name of it.
Because
Yeah.
I was still visiting there as a mental health social worker in the 60s.
This would be what a hospital looked like.
This brings back memories, I'm afraid.
Which looks kind of, I don't know what it looks like to me. It's incredibly clean, I think. I imagine everything was just, you know, smelt of carbolic. And
All the trolley wheels had to face the same way.
Well, let's go back. I've got something to say before that. Yeah, here we are. Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm a bit disjointed this morning. Forget that one for a moment. This is a rather, I don't know what the word is. This is on the picture there, which looks like a lovely old country house, but I'm sure that wasn't how it was.
Prestwich was absolutely geared for the hierarchy. Your level of corruption went to the top. And I'm not saying there weren't good nurses there, there were, but there was a lot of corruption. You know, you'd see the chief male nurse come out with a parcel and you would know that should be going to patients. You know, that was the level of corruption. My first 12 hours on Infirmary 1, I got a massive insight about what I needed to do to look after myself during the remainder of my training, because I'd already broken my training.
Okay. I remember being threatened with Prestwich Looney Bin when I was a kid if I didn't behave. So,
yeah, that's it.
Here we are at, where's this, Lorraine?
Sandcoats.
Sandcoats as it was. The only bit that's left is this middle bit with the arch with it says, but it's...
used to work split shifts, Derek. I don't know if you remember that. Starting at 7:30 in the morning, working till 1 o'clock, and then you'd get 3 hours off and go back on duty at 4:30 till 8:30. And in the afternoon, they had a huge lounge where you would go and have a sleep in the afternoon, and all the nurses would be there with their capes on, all wrapped up on these couches, having a sleep in the afternoon.
Ancoats Hospital existed in one form or another from 1828. It was originally the Ardwick and Ancoats dispensary, especially medicine and outpatients clinic. It wasn't a residential hospital. At this point in time, Ardwick was rather a posh area. So you think about Ardwick Green and the remaining Georgian properties there, but it was, the dispensary at Ancoats was built for the benefit of local labourers and textile workers living in very, very poor conditions. The population of Ancoats was enormous in the 19th century. Incredible child mortality brought the average life expectancy of a labour in 1842 to 17 years. I mean, obviously, that would be brought down because of the number of children dying either, you know, very young, but nevertheless, it's quite frightening, isn't it? Yeah. By 1900, it was a voluntary hospital for acute and general treatment, and it was paid for by upper middle class philanthropists, if you like. The donors and ratepayers decided who should be treated. So if your illness was related to alcohol or syphilis or some kind of sexually transmitted disease, you weren't allowed to be treated. You had to throw yourself on the mercy of either the workhouse or your family, and presumably die sooner or later, probably sooner. Infectious diseases like typhoid and diphtheria were the responsible of the local authorities. I think there was a big hospital in Oldham Road that was built as a typhoid hospital specifically in the early part of the 20th century. If you were infirm rather than ill, you had to rely on your family or the workhouse, basically. The hospital was funded at this time from donations. This guy, James Jardice, donated 12,500 in 1886, which equates to £6 million in today's money. The city's first X-ray unit followed in 1907, and it was actually a good hospital in its day. You know, it was up to date. And main cause of death in the 19th century, most children died of diarrhea. I hope I've spelt it correctly because it's a horrible word to spell. But there you go. In adults, the worst killer was TB, or consumption as it was known in those days. Many children died accidentally from fire, catching their clothes, you know, getting warm by the fire, scalding. A surprising number were accidentally suffocated in bed by their parents or their siblings. You remember, you could buy medicines which were used to tranquilize children, I suppose, in a way. But they would probably be containing laudanum and stuff, and the wrong kind of dosage could, depending on the child's strength or whatever, quite often they were fatal doses anyway. So, but these things were advertised in the, you know. Here we have Manchester Royal Infirmary, which is a rather splendid building, occupying what is now Piccadilly Gardens. I think you can see Queen Victoria's statue, which is still there. And that building at the back on the top right-hand corner is the Crown Court in 8 Elm Street. So, and this must be early 1900s, because the electric trams didn't start till 1900, 1901, I think. We still got hansom cabs and stuff. But it was, in fact, as hospitals go in those days, it was a centre of excellence. Again, it was voluntary. It says that, I can read this to you. So that Manchester Voluntary Hospital were prestigious institutions and a focus for its civic pride. Manchester Royal Infirmary, founded in 1752, was both the city's largest hospital and its greatest charity until 1908. It sat at the heart of the city in Piccadilly. And they were funded by charitable donations, by subscriptions. Anybody would be admitted. Probably the accommodation provided would vary according to whether you could pay or not. I would imagine so. There would be like posh bits to it where people could afford to pay for it. But generally, nobody was refused attention. This is what he was replaced in 1908 by this building on Oxford Road. The facade, most of that is still there, but it's all been replaced by all this new stuff behind it now, which is the University of Manchester Hospitals. But my birthplace, Trafford General Hospital, Park Hospital David Hume, as it was known in its day, which was the very first National Health Hospital in the country. Unfortunately, I came a year too early, so presumably my parentage.
Well, yeah, I was born 3 weeks ahead of you in the same place.
That's right, in the same place. There you go. We almost met, Bernard. Yeah.
We should have had a Zoom.
Christmas Day in the Workhouse poem.
I did nice those birds.
It's Christmas Day in the Workhouse, the Colbert walls are bright with garlands of green and holly, and the place is a pleasant sight, and blah blah. And it goes on and it gets more and more depressing. And here we are. And the guardians and their ladies, although the wind is east, have come in their furs and wrappers to watch their charges feast, to smile and be condescending, putting on pork plates, to be hosts at the workers' banquet they paid for with the rates. The Workhouse figures in literature specifically, there aren't stories about the Workhouse, but Oliver Twist, the Workhouse figures quite importantly at the beginning of the novel. In fact, I think Oliver is referred to as Workhouse when he's apprenticed out to the undertaker, Mr. Sowerbury. In Far From London Crowd by Thomas Hardy, Fanny Robin dies in childbirth in the Workhouse after she's been rejected by Sergeant Troy. And George Orwell, interestingly, wrote a very in Down and Out in Paris and London. There's a section of quite interesting reading about his time spent in a workhouse in London. Rather sad picture of it's called Eventide in the Union Workhouse in Westminster by Sir Herbert von Hirchner, who presumably was of Dutch origin. And it's all these old ladies have no teeth by the looks of things.
Yes, oh yes, awful.
It's a lovely painting actually, but there is a famous etching of it as well. But you know, what a way to end your days, I suppose. But maybe it was better than starving to death in putrid
Quite
tenements.
companionable.
Sorry.
Quite companionable.
Yeah. At least you have,
Yeah.
So you know, it probably had a good side to it as well. But
There's probably some nursing homes not much better than that, Graham,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
days.
No.
yeah, but you know,
Yeah.
people always had a fear of ending. I mean, maybe this is a rather romanticized picture as well. You know,
Yeah,
one
it is.
imagines that maybe it wasn't quite as, because if you look in the background, it doesn't look all that wonderful. Trafford General Hospital, birthplace at the NHS. I received a visit with Nuremberg in July 1948 to launch the National Health Service. By which time I was already eating solids, but there you go. Today's presentation over and done with.
Well
And
done.
there's obviously masses more about it, but it was just a general overview of.
Why not?
Yeah, so I don't know how it came about. It's always fascinated me that what we did before the NHS. You know, like I know that the old age pensioners came in 1908. But only for men, and men aged 70, I think it was 70 and above. And probably in 1908, there weren't that many men who reached 70, you know what I mean? 70 was old age in those days, you know.